So good morning, everybody. This is the Bitcoin Veterans Mining Podcast with Brett G, Average Gary, and M0ntan1. Good morning. How's everybody doing?
Another beautiful day. Another
Living the
block.
dream.
We just hit an all-time high of block height.
Over
Nice.
Zeta hash?
Oh, I don't. No, that's hash rate. Block height.
Oh,
We hit a new
shut up.
all-time high every 10 minutes. on
Is it
average.
like, are we at 900,000 yet?
We're close though. Where are we at? We should probably start with that, right? Like, what block height are we at? 899,787.
Getting close.
Very close. Very close.
So we had a Bitcoin veteran Telehash. How'd that go, Rick?
Yeah, so I got some stats from Gabe, and it was for Operation Bitcoin. 14.3 million sats were raised, which is around $15,000. The max hash rate was 108 petahash. We had between 750 and 900 workers, and they're still verifying that. So I don't know.
That's very nice.
It was pretty good, man. I would say it was resounding success.
Yeah, and to be clear, like some of the behind-the-scenes chats, like, so one of the BVs stood up a datum server to point hash rate to, right? And that was like the initial thing. And we got to a point where there's so many workers and so much hash that like the data, like his little server that he set up, like couldn't handle it. And so another part of the hash, Telehash, like one of the actually hashers, stood up another datum instance or referenced some datum instance mining to the same address, same account, etc. in Ocean. So that was probably the coolest thing. Was just like watching the BVs and monitoring the chats and seeing like this thing come to fruition, where days before the Telehash there were like people testing it out, making sure it worked, and like going through, honestly, like through exercise and training practices, right? Like military veterans know what it's like to do something in an exercise scenario where it's like, hey, we're going to do this before we do it live, right? Like we're going to do the real thing. We have this operation or this thing that we want to do, but let's practice and let's do the thing for real, or as real as we can get. It just so happens with like hash rate, you can just start hashing, right? There's nothing stopping you. So that was probably the coolest thing, is like before this Telehash even kicked off, we knew it worked. We've seen D6 Foundation do it, but there was a lot of iterations prior to make sure that we were absolutely dialed in from a technical perspective. And huge shout out to all the BVs that were involved in this Telehash, because it happened. It just happened. Like, it was crazy. And then people were like, whoa, we got like a petahash. Whoa, we got like another petahash. And like every hour is like, there was a new update in the chat where somebody was like, oh yeah, we're at like 80 petahash now. And that was incredible. Is the only way to describe
it. Yeah, it was wild, man. I think when we saw like a petahash, that was kind of like a mental thing, because most of the people were putting their bit axes on there, and we're like, oh, okay, cool, we're at like 100 terahash. And I threw a couple slim 19s on there, and it was like, oh, we're up at like 200, 300. And then bam, we get hit, and it's like 5 petahash, and we're like, whoa, what's going on? Yeah,
right.
And so we had a dark horse from left field come in, and it was Electron Energy, and still not clear who these people are, but they dropped, I think, like 100 petahash on us.
Well, and that's an interesting thing to touch on in the mining space, and generally like the broader like fundraising space, is we had a pseudo anonymous donor of hash rate that essentially made this even bigger success than it already was, right? Getting to a petahash alone was like huge success, but like getting a big hash rate provider that came in and took us up to levels that I was not expecting that, like absolutely not expecting it.
Yeah. So early on, we had the San Antonio Bitcoin Club, and they came in strong, and they were it looked like they were dropping like some, full S19s on us, and we're like, whoa, and it was awesome. And I think, they came in for like 1 or 2 petahash, and we're like, man, how blessed are we to have like, such great friends. Yeah. And then, it hits us with 100 petahash, and we're like, holy crap, what do we do?
Well, so like, what is this 14 million sats going towards? Like, like Operation Bitcoin, why does that matter?
So it's Gabe's, he's the founder over there, and it's for Bitcoin education for veterans. It's the Georgia what's the name of it's the Vector, right? Vector training. And he provides training for veterans that are, coming off of active duty, as well as, veterans and actually veteran spouses. And I think when's the cutoff I think it's next week is the cutoff for his next training. I should have known this before we went in, but.
Yeah, I think the next cohort of Operation Bitcoin is starting in this month in June.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah,
really.
still can sign up for all the veterans out there, so.
Yeah, totally. And, last minute signups, it's a virtual class to my understanding to a degree. Like I think he's expanded. The first iteration was, in person, but I think he's sort of expanding the offerings and sort of what's possible with this Operation Bitcoin Education Initiative.
Yeah. I think there was a lot of good feedback on the first one. So I think that's going to be something that's perpetual.
Do you know what topics they specifically cover?
I think, I haven't taken it myself. I'm thinking about sitting in on it just so I can speak intelligently about the curriculum. But I believe it's based on the My First Bitcoin curriculum. So it's going to be like monetary history, monetary theory, like some light economics and Bitcoin, how it works, what money is, so forth. So
yeah, the Mu Premier Bitcoin or My First Bitcoin curriculum is like designed with high school students in mind. And it's a free and open source curriculum. I think if you go to like myfirstbitcoin.io, you can check it out. But Operation Bitcoin, so operationbitcoin.io/enrollment is where you can enroll in the next online course. And they are I think they're a node of My First Bitcoin. Like the way My First Bitcoin structured their organization is they have like these nodes, which they're just groups that are going through the curriculum and have a certain degree of proof of work. And Operation Bitcoin has posted a lot of proof of work.
Yeah, it's the first thematic node, meaning a lot of these nodes are geographically based. Like Alaska Wade's a node up there, and there's a few different nodes like they're geographically based. But this is the first one that has like a common theme of, veteran students, veteran learners.
Sweet. Yeah, I'll put that link I see there. I'll put that in the show notes below. Is there any more housekeeping stuff before we get into some technical details about tides and datum?
Good.
Yeah, I got nothing.
So one of the things that came up during the veterans Telehash, was the 8x payout structure of tides and understanding how the share log window works. And because we solo mined at first, or the people that were actually running the server, it wasn't me particularly. I was just had the honor of being in the chat and watching it all unfold. It was pretty cool. And one of the things that happened was they sold them at first, then they switched to cold mining, and the payouts started coming with a delayed response, but then they didn't stop coming. And it was like, whoa, we were happy with the first one, but then a second one, a third one, a fourth one. And I believe the last one was today, according to the chat. And we wanted to discuss why that was happening. And there's a couple different places in the tides documentation that Gary sent over, which I just finished reading last night. And so I just opened it up there. I have like 2 or 3 questions. I have my own hypothesis as to why it is, but I'm afraid to sound stupid. So
I'll sound stupid. I'll sound stupid.
I will too, but I want to delay.
Let's talk about block height.
I prefer not to sound stupid, but if I have to, I will.
Oh, I can be that guy. So it's 8, right? It's the 8 following blocks from when you shut off.
Yeah. So okay. So it's a window, unless Gary.
Okay. So look, I look stupid, so you don't have to.
So there's a sliding window. It appears. So I'll just say it. My hypothesis was that the reason it kept going so long is because if you don't mine an entire epoch, when epoch being 2016 blocks, a 2-week or 10-day period, then it just takes, in order to be fair, your share window that slides in order to distribute the pool shares. I'm not talking about the actual shares for the Coinbase. I'm saying like the pool shares, in order to distribute the Coinbase equally. If there's a difficulty adjustment, like a day or two right after you stop mining, it divides the share window, expands it, and makes it bigger. So we actually get more credit for doing the mining than we actually did. And so that's my hypothesis. Go ahead and destroy it if you'd like.
No, I mean it's we're not like wrong here, but the technical nuance is it's 8 blocks worth of difficulty, right? So there's this concept of difficulty for the broader network, and then each block has its own difficulty that's calculated. And so the way they adjust this window of what are, shares that are sort of eligible for payout is this share log window, right? And so it's, the share log window is 8 times the block's difficulty worth of shares, right? So
Okay.
it's a window that's going to change just because each block has a different difficulty.
Now, does that mean 8 blocks have to be mined, or is it 8 blocks worth of work? Like, as if, like, what is it? Is it like, so for example, if a block is 1 to 1.5 megabytes, is it 8 to 10 megabytes worth of shares? Is that what we're talking about? Or is it, what's the
Yeah,
8
so
times what variable?
So the difficulty of each block, if you pull up, let's see where it's at. If you pull up mempool.space, I believe you can see the difficulty. So I'm going to share my screen here and apologize to any of the audio listeners. But in each block, there's an actual value here. It's a numerical value, like it's some ridiculously high value in the, let's see, there's thousands, millions, billions, trillions, right? So one of the most recent blocks had 126 trillion something as the difficulty. This is like a number that is calculated, and I can't explain. I've looked at this before, but it's like some algorithm or mathematical equation to arrive at like the difficulty. And the simplest way to sort of understand it is what most people refer to as like the proof of work, like the leading zeros, right? But there's a way of going from the number of leading zeros to this number called difficulty. And I don't recall the specifics of that formula, but it's just another way of representing like the difficulty of the network itself. And so each block has its own difficulty. So if we go to another block and we look at it compared to this other one, it's still in the 126 million range. But if we look, it's like 126 trillion, 982 billion, which that's pretty same there. And I think this might be consistent across difficulty epochs if I had to guess, right? And so the share log window, like the number of shares is 8 times that block's difficulty worth of shares. So 8 times whatever some trillion is like 800 some trillion worth of shares, roughly, that are eligible within the share log window, right? And then there's a calculation that goes into that. And so that's why you saw after we were done telehashing, after our hash rate sort of fell off from the pool, we still had shares that were in this window of eligible to be paid out. And
but how many would it work out to 8? Did it work out to 8 times? Did anybody do that verification? Because I feel like it just kept going and going way beyond what was expected.
No, I don't know. I didn't go dig through the share log. I'm not even sure where Ocean surfaces that share log. If they do, I would imagine they do.
No, I looked for everything I could find. I read actually everything. There was only 6 pieces of documentation on the Ocean website.
So look at the found blocks and look at when we shut off.
I don't know where that is. Do you guys have a link to our?
No, just go up to the top there.
Mm-hmm.
See the little blocks, 1, 2, 3, 4,
right,
5, 6, 7, 8, right? Yeah.
We stopped mining on the.
Well, it's not the blocks.
26th.
Remember, it's not the blocks. It's difficulty in a block times 8. So this, 126 trillion number ish in recent blocks times 8, and that is the share log window. That's like the size. That's the number of shares.
That's how
that are
they.
eligible.
That's how they determine how large the window is.
Correct. Yes.
And then there's a diagram. If you scroll down, there's a nice visual of what
Here?
the share. There it is. Yeah, that's what the window looks like. They said, and then it gives you examples. The next screen down.
Yeah.
Keep going down right there. Yeah. So the way I read that is those light blue turquoise blocks go down a little bit more. Right there. Those are the shares that are submitted by the particular miner in question, right?
Yeah. So the apps and what we're looking at is, and there's numbers at the bottom of these diagrams too that show sort of the share window size, the percentage that a given miner has out of that window, and then the number of shares in the window as well, and the network difficulty. So you can look, like the network difficulty in this example is 32. So 32 times 8, 256. So there's 256 shares eligible. And then you look within that window for any given miner for an eligible, like a valid share, right? So if your miner has shares, and so as this, sort of progresses, if you're hashing, you're going to have shares within the window, and it shows a series of 4 different windows. And it shows that like this miner, which is identified by the letter U in this example, has more shares as time goes on. And then eventually that share window is sort of the same size after like a given period, but eventually some of those shares fall outside of the window, right? But if you think about it, if the difficulty goes up, so if you're going across a difficulty period, you might have shares come back into that window because the difficulty goes up, right? Because as the difficulty changes for each block, you're multiplying that number by 8. So if we cross a difficulty adjustment threshold and we go from 126 trillion maybe down to like 90 trillion, now it's a smaller window. But if we go from 126 trillion to 150 trillion, now that's a much bigger window. So you might even have old shares that were previously aged out that are now being considered.
That's what I was saying. We had that difficulty adjustment.
Did we have it when we crossed it?
It was on the 30th, I believe, the 29th or 30th. So it was like a day or two after we stopped hashing. And then it jumped up like 3 to 4% in difficulty. And, and then there's this one paragraph in here that talks about you can be rewarded multiple times. It just depends on the pool luck. So it could be more than 8 times. So I was wondering if that.
It talks about the average. Where was it? I think it's on
I'm trying
average.
to find it. I can't find it now, but I remember reading something about it on here.
Yeah, hold on, I know where.
So it basically keeps a log of all old shares, like it's in order to make it fair. So if the window gets bigger, you can still get paid for your work. It seems really very cool, and I'm a big fan. I'm becoming more and more of a big fan of this ocean pool.
I mean, it kind of lends itself to like legging in and legging out, as opposed to not having a footprint on the network, right? Like,
what do you mean by that?
Makes sense? So just so you're always considered in shares, like you always, like, instead of like taking all your hash rate on and all your hash rate off, like if you were to move your hash rate to leg it in and then leg it out, right? So you're always represented
in the share log?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. I haven't really given that consideration, but I've heard like pool hopping is sort of was a consideration in previous accounting schemas. But that was more so, and to tie it into maybe like a topic that we discussing was one of my friends, VNPRC, gave a presentation on the different accounting methodologies for mining pools at BTC++, which happened relatively recently since the last pod that we recorded. But it goes into sort of some of the trade-offs that each of these accounting methods do. So like one of the first, like most naive thing to do is every share is sort of proportional. It's like you take however many shares you have and divide it by however many total shares have been submitted for the block. But that means that like the first share is 100%. right? So if you're early, right after a block, if you start mining to a pool that does proportional payouts, you have a bigger percentage of the total shares that are going to be paid out. And so what that, at least historically to my understanding, is like you jump into a pool, you mine at the beginning, you don't find a block, so now you jump into a different pool or something along those lines.
I'm trying to game the system.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So does this method, does this induce pool hopping?
No.
Like, I mean, doesn't it given a, no? Like if you're still being paid for the work you did, essentially, right?
No, they're just trying to make it as fair as possible. And that's the whole premise behind it, is to record everyone's work and keep it within the only thing that slides is the share window based on the difficulty, is my understanding, right?
Yeah, so Ocean, it ties as sort of a variation or one way of implementing PPLNS, which is pay per last N shares. And in this case, N is that share log window, right? So you're getting paid per last N shares. To solve for N, you take the block's difficulty multiplied by 8, and that's how many shares worth are being accounted for.
Okay.
Right. And that's different than FPPS, which is full pay per share, where you're getting paid no matter what, right? Like it doesn't matter. Like you're getting paid per share. You're getting a full pay per share. And that's sort of like a pre-negotiated agreement between you and the pool. So yeah. It's pricing hash rate. All this is like, how do you price hash rate? Is you can do proportional, which we kind of went over. You can do PPLNS, you can do FPPS. There is another proposal out there called, I think it's called Slice, or PPLNS with job declaration. Because in the thesis of that is, if you're going to be mining on different templates, if I'm mining on a template that has less fees, that is less economically valuable to the pool than a template that has more fees. For whatever reason, you might want to mine on a block with less fees or with more fees or whatever, right? But the payout to the miner, if you're going to be doing pooled mining, to be fair, that's a very interesting word. We can talk about the philosophy of that. But to be fair is you would want to reward somebody for mining on a block with more fees, more so than you would want to reward somebody mining on like an empty block, right? And so this slice methodology, which is being used by Demand Pool, DMND, is like a relatively newer Stratum V2 pool, is they take into account the template that you're using. And so your normal PPLNS, right, is used for the block subsidy, that guaranteed amount of Bitcoin, right? That thing that trends down over time due to halvings. That is like normal accounting. But then you take the fees that are in the block for the share that's being submitted. So I can know what template you're using for your share. It's part of the validation that I, as a pool runner, or whoever, as a pool runner, you want to validate that you're actually hashing on something that's worthwhile, right? That you're hashing on a template that pays to the pool. Well, you can weight the shares based on how many fees they have. So if you weight the shares heavier for somebody hashing on a block full of juicy fees,
Gotcha.
You'd want to weight lighter on an empty block template.
So that opens up another question for me. So now we've got Datum, where we have an easier way to do our own block templates. And is there another way? Like, because you didn't mention Datum with this new pool that I've never heard of before until just now.
Yeah, there is another way. So Datum, and if you, again, BTC++, the creator of Datum, Jason Hughes, I believe his name is, he gave a presentation on this topic. You can go watch the YouTube video. But Datum is a way to do your own block template creation. You hook it up to your node, you're creating the blocks, and then to my understanding, and I'm not super deep on the technicals of this, but to my understanding is you're mining up to Ocean Pool over Datum, and all Ocean really cares about is that you're paying out correctly in the Coinbase, right? So the communication between you and Ocean at this point is like, they're not necessarily worried about the template that you're creating. They want a valid template, of course. But what they're really worried about is the pool gets paid. Because that's what you're doing with a pool, is like, we're going to pool our resources. We're all going to get paid. So with Datum, they said, hey, we don't care what your template is. Ocean also separately offers different block templates depending on what your preference is. But if you're creating your own template, all we care is that you're paying Ocean in the Coinbase transaction, because that's ultimately what pool mining is about, is getting paid in a common Coinbase transaction so that way rewards can be distributed, right? So Datum allows you to do your own template creation while paying in it. The opposite side of it, and you'll hear it referenced in Jason's presentation, is in Stratum v2, there is a protocol defined or named job declaration, which has a very, very similar sort of philosophy to it, where you can do job declaration at your local site. You as a miner, a provider of hash rate, you create your own templates. And again, the negotiation between the client and the server for job declaration does much of the same process, where we just care that you're mining to the pool Coinbase, right? And we care that if you're doing payouts in the Coinbase, that it's accurate, right? And so Stratum v2's job declaration accomplishes a lot of the same things that Datum accomplishes, where you can
Datum does.
bring the template creation down to where the actual hash rate is. You're actually creating the template and hashing on the template, right? So you're an actual miner. You're not just a hash rate provider. There was some consternation on the Ocean side as far as like the progress that Stratum v2 is making. And so they took 6 months and wrote their own sort of like spec and implementation to do it. And it's impressive. Like Datum works. So
where can the listeners get a how-to guide on how to do the Stratum v2 template creation that you just spoke about?
Yeah, so stratumprotocol.org is sort of the entry website that outlines it. Be on the lookout on things coming out about it.
Didn't Mechanic do a step-by-step that they uploaded to YouTube? I think I watched that for a Start9 server.
For Datum? Yes, absolutely.
For Datum, yeah.
Yeah, they have, I think, a guide, Datum setup guide on how to do it.
Asking about the other way.
Oh, for Stratum v2?
Gotcha.
I'm not aware of a specific resource for it.
Hey, there's an opportunity.
That's very
Sometimes I like to feel real stupid and I go into their Discord.
Yeah, Stratum v2 has a Discord that you can go into and just, ask in there. And most people in there will be happy to explain it to you. Stratum v2 is a project that I've recently spent a lot of time working on and with. I think it's promising. My affinity for it largely came from as one of the only open source projects that I could wrap my head around because it's written in a language that I understand, which is Rust. The Datum implementation is written in C. I'm not super savvy on C, so I haven't quite dug into the technicals of that.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, so if you have a Start9, I think Datum is pretty easy to do on there, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's how it was done during the Telehash. And like he said, I was asking a little bit about the bandwidth of his internet service provider, and I think he had 13 megabytes a second, but he still was able to do 40 petahash before it kind of hit its ceiling. So that begged another question of like, okay, if you want to do this at scale with the Start9, is Start9 the problem, or is it the bandwidth that was the problem? Because my understanding is that the Datum gateway sits at a, that's not the same as Ocean Pool. So you're not doing anything with Ocean Pool except connecting to it and then taking the peer-to-peer data from the Start9 and the Bitcoin network, and you're just building the template and issuing it to the pool. Is that a correct summation?
I think that's correct. And I don't want to say it's Start9 necessarily, but it's, resource limitation. So Start9, you could run in the cloud on AWS on like some super beefy server, right? So like Start9 is just an operating system, a platform that makes it pretty easy to run a lot of these services. So I would say it's probably limited to the hardware he's running on and or his internet connection, because you do have inbound connection. All those hashers were connecting directly to his node to get all the work and all the Stratum stuff.
So I was on the airplane to Bitcoin 2025, and I started building on AWS an EC2 instance with Datum and Start9 OS. But then it was just really hard to do on an airplane. And then all this other stuff happened in my personal life, and I didn't finish it. But it's still sitting there, and I want to finish it. Do you think that's a good way to do it? What are the trade-offs on that scenario?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have a BitX or any, a Slim 19, anything that you want to hash with yourself, if you want to be a true miner where you're crafting the templates with your node, but you still want the benefits of pool mining, Datum on a Start9 is like a fantastic way to get started. If you're a little more technical savvy, go check out Stratum v2 as well. Again, there's not necessarily that push button easy access yet to Stratum v2's setup. I think we'll see that in the future, even if I have to build it myself. But Datum, you can go to Start9, you can go to the community marketplace, you can download it, you can go reference the instructions, and I've done it. It was a relatively straightforward process. And yeah, we've had Bitcoin veterans do it. So it's an easy thing to do, right? Like it's not a huge hurdle to get over.
True.
Not to discredit any Bitcoin veterans that have done it, but
Yeah, none present, of course.
But I was asking about AWS, running it off of AWS on an EC2 instance. Is that a good idea or not? I mean, running the node probably isn't a good idea, but putting a Datum gateway on an EC2 wouldn't be a bad idea, right?
So I guess good idea versus bad idea is like, what are your trade-offs, right? If you want absolute self-sovereignty over your technology stack, you're going to run it on a device you bought off a Facebook marketplace. That's, 8-core CPU with 16 gigs of RAM. That's plenty to run that. People are running Datum on like Pies, if I understand correctly, in very, very austere environments. EC2, it's just an easy, you don't have it. The whole reason the cloud exists is because people wanted to stop managing their own hardware, right? And so what you've seen is a commoditization of that hardware. And we're getting back to the point where you can get really robust hardware and run your own stack, or you can say, hey, I'm a businessman. I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm not good at. And if you're not good at managing hardware and you don't want to go through the hassle of figuring out the networking and the configuration, you've got, if your power goes out, you've got an issue, that sort of thing. But in the mining space, we're hardware. We do hardware things, right? Every Bitcoin mining site that I've ever been to or heard about is you've got energy and electricity there. So grab a cheap laptop online, an old ThinkPad or an old gaming desktop that somebody's selling, pick it up, upgrade the hard drive, throw a Bitcoin node on there, throw Start9 on there, and stand up Datum or Stratum v2 and get to hashing. It's just a matter of how easy do you want it, right? A lot of companies have been able to outsource their hardware and sort of that sort of hassle to Amazon and Google and Microsoft and all these other people. It's not good. It's not bad. It's a trade-off that you're making, because if you have a problem, maybe it's part of your support agreement. But yeah, if you want to tinker, I think, EC2 instances are relatively cheap to run and you can do it. But I think
I was thinking about
is cheaper.
I was just thinking about what if we were in the Telehash and all of a sudden one of these large companies decides to do, for whatever reason, maybe a publicity stunt or whatever, they give us 6 exahash. Would we be able to handle that? We wouldn't even be able to accept it. So maybe some kind of elastic load balancer system built off of AWS might be good for something like Telehash that could go from 1 peta to 6 exahash in theory. You need to be ready for that because you don't want to just waste that opportunity, So that's why I was thinking in terms of that versus a Start9 with a 300 megabytes ISP line, might not, you're limiting yourself. So I'm just thinking maybe for those edge cases, and I just want opinions on it. And I wanted to put that out there as something to think about, because the trade-offs are real. It is self-sovereignty versus more of a centralized solution, but isn't there a place for both?
Absolutely. And any of the major pools are likely running in a cloud, right? Because any major computational company is running in a cloud, right? It's when you get to a certain scale, the trade-off makes sense to have somebody else manage that for you as part of your operational expenses. So yeah, it would probably make sense to have what you can do. I think, to my understanding, and most cloud platforms support something like this, is you can create sort of like a snapshot image of a virtual machine. And then like, if you need to, you can just be like, boom, let's stand this up. And then you can add a network load balancer in front of it and all these other cloud things where you don't have to worry about the complexity of your internet connection or your hardware. And yeah, if you're thinking you're going to get 6 exahash on your home server, on your home internet service provider, like, we learned that it doesn't work. It doesn't work after, like 30 petahash or whatever, right? Like it fell over. So
That would be
lessons
awesome, though.
learned,
I
man.
mean, but it could happen. It could happen. I mean,
I think
in this
it'll happen.
space, it could happen. I mean, the 256 Foundation, I was there when they hit that block, was using an Apollo node, and it was like 1 exahash. And
Yeah, they
hit
were
it.
like at 860 petahash, 890 petahash. Is that what it was?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
yeah, it was a
So
lot of
how-
hash rate.
Yeah, how were they configured? Do you know?
I don't know. That's a great question.
We should
though.
ask them.
We could.
we
yeah.
should
They've been really open with us, like really helpful, like
Well, Brian,
really great
Brian,
resources for everything.
Brian was there, and he's actually worked out in the field with us, and he's a really good friend. We could get him on here, and he helped with that, set all that up. Him and Steve. I heard something about the VAR diff was a problem, but once they figured that out, they were able to get the 1 exahash.
What's
Explain
a VAR
VAR
diff,
diff,
Brett?
like I don't know what that is.
Just like we talked about it in the first podcast that we did, episode 1. Just the maximum and minimum difficulty that you can accept the pool shares before or reject, and it basically tells
Right.
you how much your hash rate actually is, or they
Okay,
estimate.
and to review, let me see if I can remember. It was like an S9 would have a lower difficulty potential. Is that even a word? Than like a S21, and it could be doing trillions on the S21, whereas you're down to right? Am I somewhere there?
Yeah, you're totally right. It's Because-
Again, nailed it.
when you're mining, when you're running a pool, you have all these appliances connecting to you, all these devices. And they're just trying to tell you that they're working on stuff. They're giving you these shares. So if you have your difficulty for the pool too low, an S21 is just going to hammer you with like, hey, I found a share. 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 So you're getting like a denial of service. So VAR diff will sort of like throttle that and will say like, hey, you're giving me a lot of shares, so why don't you try harder, right? Here's a higher difficulty. Or if you're not giving me enough shares within like a 30-second period, I might say, hey, I haven't seen a share from you. You're still connected. Can you just maybe give me like a lower difficulty just to prove that you're still working? And it's this sort of like this balance of, I want to know that you're hashing, but I don't want to be, DOSed. I don't want just a flood of messages from you because you're finding something that's not difficult enough, right?
Yeah. So what would have caused them to have? So if you have like a mixed bag of miners, if you have a S9 and a S21 and a Gamma and a Supra and all your bit axes like on the network, if you have like a large range of different, like, does that create a situation where
It could, but it's sort of per connection is
Oh,
my
okay.
understanding of VARDIF is this connection here with this specific miner has a difficulty that the pool says, hey, this is what we're looking for. And then
okay.
per connection, it will sort of adjust if you're doing it properly, right? You could do this pool wide, but again, if you have a homogeneous pool, right? Like with a bunch of different devices, then they're all going to have different hash rates, and you're going to get, the S21s are going to, if it's the same across the board, all the S21s are just going to be super noisy, and the bit axes are going to be completely quiet. And so with VARDIF, you start at the same point, but then like when the S21's too noisy, you say, hey, turn the ratchet up a little bit. Or if you could get a bit axe connected, you say, hey, turn that down a little bit. Show me that you're working, but I need you to tell me something. And so obviously it's too difficult for you, so let me lower that.
So my assumption is, to recap and make sure I'm right here, that the pool shares, the difficulty of the pool shares are not connected to finding a block and the multiple 19 or 20 zeros in front of the block header that you need to find for the next block that gives you the block reward.
Yeah,
Did I
shares
say
are
that
just for
completely?
accounting.
They're agnostic.
Well, it's the concept of
So,
weak blocks is something like shares are just weak blocks. Like you found a block hash with
mhm,
work on it. It's just not enough for the network to care about.
mhm.
But me as a
so,
pool, I care about it because I want to credit you
so,
for it.
so let's make another statement that can be true or false. It doesn't matter if you have a BitX or an S21. They're both equally capable of finding a block in actuality. True or false?
True. Every hash has the same chance of having enough proof of work on it to be a block.
Statistically, is it like the same as a coin flip game where each coin flip is statistically independent of the next coin flip? It's not a game of averages.
Right.
Is that how it works?
But if you
Right.
flip more coins, you're more
But
likely to
obviously,
find
if
the
you flip
outcome.
more coins, so that S21 is like a bucket of coins, and an BitX is like 1/4.
Exactly. And that's why, I personally market my bid axes that I sell as lottery miners, right? And you'll see that
Mhm,
as like a common thread is because, the bid axe, the one chip on the bid axe is not necessarily, enough to really have
mhm.
great impact on the network or even in a pool, depending on the hash rate of the pool. But again, you are hashing and it's like you have the same odds as anyone else. Every time you hash, you have the same odds, but you're just hashing more with
Hey,
bigger machines.
do you sell these on a website or something like that? I can put in the show notes.
Yeah, virginiafreedom.tech is the website. It's just like
Okay.
my side hustle LLC.
Yeah, let's put it in there. If people want a BitX, you can click on that link below. I've got a meeting in 8 minutes. Rick, do you have a website for? There's a really big conference coming up. Do you want to say anything about it?
Yeah, I do. BitcoinAlaska.org is coming up July 1st through July 6th. Main conference is on the 5th and the 6th. Just pop in there if you get a chance. Take a look at the speakers. I think you're going to be pretty shocked at how good it's going to be.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna be there as well. It's gonna be awesome. I'm very excited to go to Alaska. I've never been.
I
Yeah,
will
it's
have
going to be dope.
Maybe
FOMO.
I want to see a
We'll
killer
send you
whale.
pictures.
Is there a cold plunge going on up there?
Yeah, I think we're doing the was it Operation Bitcoin run, and I don't think it's as far as the Hal Finney 5K that I didn't make the day after the biggest parties at the the Vegas thing. Sorry, Hal. But yeah, we're having a run followed by a cold plunge. So I think you get a T-shirt too. So it should be pretty cool.
Very
Literally,
cooled. Yes.
yeah.
All right. Cool. Is there anything else we should talk about?
I would say just keep an eye out on the Bitcoin veterans socials and in our circles and Bitcoin veterans. I think you're gonna see something coming for the month of November. If you're unaware, November
Okay.
11th is Veterans Day. So just be on the lookout. I'll tease that a little bit without anything more
Oh,
concrete.
okay. All right.
Very cool. I'll be looking.
All right. Well, I guess that wraps it up, boys.
Yeah,
Until next time.
if you want to be a positive change to the way that you see Bitcoin running, hash rate is probably bar none the best way to do it. Whether you care about filters or not, crafting the blocks that are going to be the tip of the chain is how you go about doing that.
I actually
sold.
argue with my boss all the time about what came first, the hash rate or the Bitcoin price. And I try to make the argument that the miners are the value proposition behind Bitcoin that drives price. It's not a very good argument, but I do
You
feel
need
like that is what caused it. That's just because I started mining and then Bitcoin went up. So I feel like I did that.
you need energy to breathe something into life, right? Like
I
these
think
things
so.
don't
I think
exist on anything.
there's.
I
I
agree with
mean,
you.
I enjoy that argument. I'd be happy to um, test that out or suss that out on in person. It's a fun conversation. It's a
I look
nice
forward
looking
to it.
chart. It's a nice looking chart you got there, Gary.
Just the hash rate, all-time hash rate, and it's up and to the right in very, very
It just keeps.
parabolic looking form.
Yeah, it just looks like it's accelerating.
Yeah, since what, 2019?
Yeah, almost like it's gonna hit the moon. I don't know.
Dude, look how tiny the Chinese miners coming offline look now.
No, that was epic when that happened.
Yeah.
That kind of changed everything for America. The mining landscape in America. It's
Yeah.
crazy. I was in Rockdale, Texas, working in 110-degree weather during that when that happened.
It was like right around Thanksgiving. I remember I was at home with the family and Bitcoin price fell out of the sky and everybody was like, "Oh, I told you so." So it was a fun Thanksgiving. I sat at the kids' table. Didn't want to
So
hear
I
it.
saw at Bitcoin 2025, I saw Peter Schiff was there. He had a booth. And so it was about 20 meters from Saifedean's booth with the Bitcoin Standard book. So first I went to Saifedean and I said, "Hey, if I can go over there and get Peter Schiff to get you in an arm wrestling pose, I think that would be an epic photo to put on the Twitter. Do you want to try it?" He just laughed me off and said, "No, he doesn't know who I am anyway." And then I went over to Peter Schiff and asked the same question. And, same thing. But that would have been an epic photo.
You could
Yeah,
probably
that
get
would have been a
AI to
good one.
generate that for you.
It's true. It doesn't even need to happen in the real world.
Anyway, well, with that, I guess we'll close it off here. And I wish you all a great day and a blessed week. And I love you all. Keep hashing.
All right, guys.
All right. See you later.
Love you.